Hello and welcome to News Review. This week has seen the Supreme Court trial of a former Gibraltar Services police officer accused of raping a child. 52-year-old Kevin Norman Whitfield was charged with 2 counts of rape of a child, 2 counts of encouraging a child to engage in sexual activity, and 2 counts of sexual assault. The case dates back to 1999, when the complainant was 11 years old. The trial has seen live evidence from both the complainant and the accused, as well as family members of both. Kellyanne Turnbull has been following the case.
52-year-old Kevin Norman Whitfield has been found guilty of 2 counts of raping a child, 2 counts of encouraging a child to engage in sexual activity, and 2 counts of sexual assault, with all charges dating back to 1999. Earlier this week at the Supreme Court, the jury heard from the victim. She told them she was raped and sexually abused by the defendant for 8 months when she was 11 years old. Now aged 28 and living in the United States, she says she finally decided to speak out after receiving years of therapy and has returned to Gibraltar to seek justice. The Royal Gibraltar Police has taken the opportunity to encourage other victims of historic sexual abuse cases to come forward.
We are very pleased for the result of this afternoon's verdict. It just demonstrates that historic cases of this nature of serious sexual offences are thoroughly investigated. They carry credence. The Attorney General was pleased to present it before the courts, and the courts have seen it through to its finality, and with the guilty pleas found on all charges.
So, Inspector, do you think because of this result, other victims of historic child abuse cases may come forward now as a result?
Well, we are of the view that victims of sexual abuse should not suffer in silence. And therefore, this case presents the perfect example of why they should take that step forward and have the trust in the RGP, have the trust in the Attorney General's chambers, and have the trust in the court system that they will be heard, and they can then therefore come forward. And if there's anybody out there that has second thoughts, they can always come in and speak to Sergeant Gonzalez, and the matter can be discussed in the utmost strictest of confidence and privacy.
And Sergeant Gonzalez, you've been leading the case since 2013, so how do you feel now that it's all over?
I'm happy with the end result, the guilty verdict the jury have come up with. I know it's not an easy decision lay on people of Gibraltar. However, what I can say is I've already relayed the message to the victim. She's happy with the decision, and she wishes to thank, obviously, the RGP for the investigation, myself and my team, and the Attorney General's chambers, the Attorney General and Crown Counsel Fernandez for taking this matter and presenting it to court.
Whitfield denied all allegations, and David Dumas QC, who represented the defendant, said there were central factors in the Crown's case that didn't add up. However, during closing submissions at the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, Ricky Roda QC, told the jury that they had no option but to consider Whitfield guilty on all 6 charges. He described the former policeman as shifty and dishonest, and said his evidence in court was a deadpan performance compared to the victim's burst of truthfulness. Puny Judge Karen Prescott instructed the jury, who retired early this morning and deliberated till mid-afternoon. They returned a unanimous verdict for all 6 charges.
A local man arrested for drink driving while carrying a child as passenger has appeared at the magistrate's court. 46-year-old Ernest John Santos faces charges of drink driving, dangerous driving, being drunk while in charge of a child, and not wearing protective headgear. He's alleged to have had a high reading of over 130 milligrams of alcohol in his breath at the time. Mr. Santos has been bailed in the sum of £500, and as part of his bail conditions, he is not allowed to drive any vehicle. He will be appearing next on the 24th of April, where he's expected to plead. The Chief Minister has signalled that Gibraltar will push for a different degree of membership if a referendum on a British exit from the European Union is held after the UK general election. If there is to be a referendum, Fabian Picardo has told the Financial Times, each of the areas that vote should be counted separately, such as Gibraltar, with negotiations allowing for different parts of the UK to remain with varying degrees of membership.
The view expressed by Fabian Picardo is in keeping with comments made by both the Scottish National Party and Plaid Cymru of Wales, who've also called for separate referendums in each of the 4 UK nations. Mr Picardo says the only threat to Gibraltar's economy would come as a result of being pulled out of the European Union against our will and denied access to the single market. However, the Chief Minister says he doesn't believe even the most rabid anti-Europeans in the UK would advocate a complete out. Mr Picardo adds that those good friends of Gibraltar who support a UK exit need to understand the economics of this. Last week, a UKIP MEP for Gibraltar, Sir William Dartmouth, claimed Gibraltar would be better off not being part of the EU, saying continued membership meant a permanent threat to the ROC's ability to set its own tax rules. Fabian Picardo says in the past, only parties from outside the UK have attempted to exclude Gibraltar from continental Europe.
And unfair taxation laws, tobacco smuggling, money laundering and police cooperation are the subjects of questions about Gibraltar submitted by 2 Spanish MEPs to the European Commission. The Chief Minister has dismissed the questions as devices designed to further promulgate the untrue fantasies of the Partido Popular.
The Partido Popular's Luis de Grandes Pascual and Francisco José Millán Mon have asked Brussels to answer 4 questions about Gibraltar. What's the current state of the European Commission's investigation into the ROC's Income Tax Act? Does the Commission consider, in common with UK Labour Party leader Ed Miliband, that Gibraltar should be included on an international blacklist of tax havens unless it does more to combat fraud and tax evasion? The MEPs reference a report prepared by the European Anti-Fraud Office OLAF in July 2014, which alleged some individuals and companies could be carrying out illegal trafficking and money laundering through Gibraltar. They inquire as to what plans the Commission has to combat these. And the 2 Spanish MEPs also claim cross-border cooperation appears to be in decline, asking the Commission for its view. Speaking to GBC, the Chief Minister said the MEP's comments are prejudicial and defamatory and have already repeatedly been shown to be untrue by the Commission and various other objective international organisations, including the OECD and the IMF. Fabian Picardo said it should not, however, be a surprise that obtuse politicians, including Mr Millán, Mariano Rajoy's brother-in-law, might try to deflect attention away from the corruption with which the Partido Popular is riven. The Chief Minister asks why the Spanish authorities have not contacted Gibraltar police or customs in order to pursue the real cooperation proposed by Gibraltar, despite direct contact details having been provided. Mr Picardo also points out that Spain's Finance Minister, Cristobal Montoro, has not replied to his letter inviting him to cooperate on tax matters.
The Deputy Chief Minister has met with the EU Commissioner for Migration and Border Management to express the government's concern at how the works on the Spanish side of the frontier are adversely affecting the flow of traffic. Dr. Joseph Garcia visited Brussels on a lobbying visit to increase awareness of Gibraltar issues among key MEPs. Among those he met with was MEP for Gibraltar Ashley Fox, who has told a prominent EU politics magazine that the European Commission should begin legal proceedings against Spain over its disproportionate actions at the frontier. The statistical information on incoming and outgoing delays at the frontier presented by Dr. Garcia to the Commissioner for Migration and Border Management includes data showing that queues were worse last month than in January and February.
We met, we had a very useful meeting with Commissioner Avramopoulos, who's responsible for migration and border management. He replaced Commissioner Malmström, who used to do that job in the past. And really, we've actually supplied him with the latest statistical information on the border delays. We do that every month. The Commission gets a monthly update on the situation at the border. We supplied him with photographs of the cars stuck in queues and also with press cuttings. So the Commission is very much kept informed by the government.
In an opinion piece in the Parliament magazine, Ashley Fox MEP says it's nearly 2 years since the politically motivated border problems began and urges the Commission to begin legal proceedings. He accuses the European Commission of turning a blind eye to Spanish harassment of Gibraltar.
They are failing to enforce the freedom of movement of people. Everyone accepts that Spain has the right to conduct reasonable and proportionate checks at its border. It's what the British government does every day at Dover and Heathrow. But the checks that Spain are carrying out are neither reasonable nor proportionate, and in fact the Commission have written to Spain saying your checks are disproportionate. That means they're unlawful. Now, 20 months later, why hasn't legal proceedings been started? I suspect the Commission doesn't want to get involved. It doesn't want to get in between two big beasts, United Kingdom and Spain. They don't want to take sides. But here's the problem. They are failing to enforce the rights of Gibraltarians, and they are suffering. Now, if we are to be citizens of the EU, if those rights are to mean anything, then the Commission has to protect them against all who might infringe them.
As well as legal action, Ashley Fox calls for the Commission to make unannounced visits to monitor progress at the frontier.
Well, yes, really, the reality is both those things make sense. We've been waiting now for a considerable amount of time for the Commission to take action against Spain. We know that they sent out 2 inspection visits, a report was produced, recommendations were made to the United Kingdom and Gibraltar and to Spain. We've complied with all the recommendations. Spain hasn't done so yet. So really there is a case for either infraction proceedings against Spain or indeed, as we've called for in the past, for the Commission to send a permanent monitoring mission to the border.
During his visit, Dr. Garcia has also told members of the European Parliament, including the Vice Coordinator of the Transport Committee, that the exclusion of Gibraltar from EU civil aviation legislation would be illegal and contrary to the EU treaties. For his part, Ashley Fox says Spain's provocative and unreasonable, as well as illogical and illegal stance on Gibraltar should not be allowed to delay EU single sky legislation. Opposition member Isabella Lowell-Hammond will not take up her appointment as the GHA's Cancer Care Coordinator until after the general election has been called. This was confirmed several days after the news media expressed doubts as to whether she could, as she intended, remain a backbencher while also being a public servant. It appeared this conflicted with the Constitution and also the Parliament Act. In a statement, the GHA acknowledges that as an elected member, Mrs. Lowell-Hammond is unable to start her employment immediately. She will therefore be Cancer Care Coordinator designate until Parliament has been dissolved. The GHA says that with a general election due this year, Mrs. Lowell-Hammond indicated she did not want to cause a by-election with the potentially high cost this would entail by resigning her seat in Parliament. The leader of the opposition has accused the Chief Minister of misleading Parliament with an answer he gave concerning how much money the government had paid directly or indirectly in respect of the proposed Europa Point Stadium. The GSD says Fabian Picardo replied that, to date, the sum of £104 had been charged to Europa Point Limited, but the opposition claims the figure is actually in excess of £835,000. Stephen Nish asked Daniel Feetham whether he was more concerned about the size of the loan or what he saw as the Chief Minister's misleading answer.
Well, it's the fact that he's not been accurate in his answers in Parliament. I mean, the government is accountable for monies expended that are taxpayers' money. It is accountable not only to Parliament but to the taxpayer. Here we have a substantial loan of £835,000 being provided to the GFA, and when I asked him how much money has the government paid in respect of the stadium and or Europa Stadium Limited, he said £104. Well, that's clearly not the case, because what's happened here is that it's the government that has paid architects, surveyors' fees, etc. to the tune of over £800,000, and then the GFA owes the government the money. So clearly the answer was not the correct answer. I mean, he was misleading Parliament.
And the Chief Minister has categorically asserted that he has never once misled Parliament or anyone else, and pins the blame on the Leader of the Opposition for not having asked the right questions in Parliament on the issue of the Europa Point Stadium's finances. Fabian Picardo said if Daniel Feetham wanted to know whether a loan was given to the GFA, he should have asked that in Parliament and should have read up on the GFA's public accounts book. He spoke to Jonathan Sacramento.